So, Heather, obviously the news this week has been rightfully dominated by the two mass shootings and murders that we saw over last weekend. One in El Paso, Texas, involving a self-styled foe of immigrants and immigration and white supremacy or a white supremacist who wrote a screed, and it explained why he decided to take a semi-automatic weapon and kill 20 people, injure 24. He was taken into custody, and then within 24 hours, maybe even 12 hours, we saw another mass shooting, this one in Dayton, Ohio, where 9 people were dead, another 24 or so injured. The shooter killed his sister. It's unclear yet as to what was his motivations. But he apparently did have a kill and rape list, according to people who went to high school with him 10 years ago. And so obviously both of them are at some baseline disturbed, but one is motivated by something that's quite clear, this white supremacy. Another we're not sure of at this point. There's been a lot of rumors about it, and I don't think until we get some more clarification. But we should also say later in the week, we also did hear that the Gilroy shooter at the Gilroy Garlic Festival in California was being investigated for under domestic terrorism because it turned out he had a kill list that apparently the authorities feel indicates that he was a political extremist. And it could very well be very similar to what we saw in El Paso. So we have two different issues here, right? We have the gun control issue, because it gives people the lethal means to carry out their deed, and then we have the white supremacy issue, which is increasingly being a motivating factor in these killings, and they don't always end up being mass murders. They can be other, sort of hate crimes. But so we have two different issues here. And, the gun control thing, I don't know. Is that how you see it, Digby?
It is. And I actually think that there's an interesting sort of dynamic in exactly what you just said. We've had mass shootings for the last decade has really seen a tremendous escalation in these events. There's been terrorism, from Islamic extremists, for a variety of reasons. There have been people with, personal grudges. There have been workplace mass shootings, schools, churches, for any number of motivations. And, obviously the one that immediately comes to mind when you start talking about this is the Newtown massacre of those 6-year-old babies by a young man who obviously had serious mental health issues, and he was able to get a hold of an automatic weapon and for reasons inexplicable went in and shot these little children. And that was a moment, that I think that everybody thought was going to be a watershed in this gun this gun control issue. The idea of unfettered access to these, killing machines came to the fore. I think everybody thought something that had to happen. No civilized society could tolerate that sort of thing. It seemed obvious. The president got behind it. The Republicans, they had 55 senators that were ready to vote for background checks and some other, long-held, needs for some kind of gun control. And the NRA, people thought they stayed silent for a good week or week and a half after it happened. And then Wayne LaPierre came and gave a speech before the Washington Press Club, and he basically threw down the gauntlet. That's where he started talking about the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, and we need to arm teachers. And that's when that whole thing, and he just came out swinging. And Mitch McConnell followed in line. He filibustered the Senate bill for gun control, and that was the end of that. And it was stunning. It was a stunning show of political force, with the NRA leading the way. But let's face it, Mitch McConnell didn't have to do that. But of course, he is the top recipient of NRA money in the Senate, and he also truly believes in this because that this is a source of tremendous power for the Republican Party. And for the next few years, we had more and more and more of these mass shootings. It's just one horrifying massacre after another. And I think for me, I kept thinking, well, at some point, this is, the body count has got to have an effect here. The NRA cannot continue to justify this. The Republicans can't keep running on it. It's absurd. And I thought after Las Vegas that where 600 people were wounded and 59 people were killed. And it was a bunch of country music fans who, I can assume that many of them may have been Trump voters. They were in this public place out in the open, in Las Vegas, the premier tourist destination in the United States. And I just assumed that this was going to have to be the one that broke. And when it didn't, I think I lost a little heart. Something in me sort of snapped a bit, and I went, you know what? Nothing is going to happen until the Republicans are out of power altogether. Right. This is the only thing that will stop this is that. So I don't lay all of that at the feet of Trump. He is, of course, a primary, sort of recipient of the gun culture love. But the gun part of this, I feel, is definitely, this is a Republican problem. Now, the white supremacy part of this.
Well, hold on. Let's hold off on the white supremacy thing for a moment, because I think we should sit with this for a moment, because I think this is absolutely right. The problem that we have with guns, and let's also be clear here. We have 20 to 30,000 people who die every year because they kill themselves with a gun. And all of the research is completely clear on this. It's clear that killing yourself with a gun is far more lethal than any other way of killing yourself. It's clear that if you fail the first time to commit suicide, the chances of you actually committing suicide go way, 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 way down. But if you try and commit suicide with a gun, you're going to be 95 to 98% successful. And so we know that it contributes. And we know that when you have longer waiting periods, when you have better background checks, the number of people who die by suicide goes down. We know all the data that we need to know about that aspect of it. And we know the same thing about in areas where there have been some type of gun reform. The number of guns don't necessarily diminish, but the lethality of the guns do, because it's harder for different people to get the guns. This is all true. And I couldn't agree with your point more on this. In fact, I was saying this all week on the Majority Report. The bottom line is, I cannot guarantee you some form of sensible gun control if the Democrats are in power, because who knows? It's likely, but who knows? And who knows to what extent the Supreme Court won't quash it. But the one thing that I can say with 100% surety is that as long as Republicans control either the presidency or one of the houses of Congress, we will get no type of gun control. We got to take a break. We'll talk about more of this on the other side. I'm Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio, here with Heather Parton.